All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us for our webinar session, session number three. We're excited to continue these series. It seems like we've gotten pretty good feedback. We at Tangam assumed you were sick of hearing my voice for an hour, so I wanted to bring on a couple of friends and colleagues, folks that I look up to in the industry, industry leaders, trendsetters. Um, you guys had the option. I know CNN today was hosting a town hall and interviewing Bill Gates, but you guys decided to hang out with us gaming guys. So I think that the people we chose for the channel for the panels is already a home run. So I'm going to introduce my two friends in the industry, worlds apart. Probably couldn't be any further apart if they tried. First, we got David Croft. David Croft is the general manager of product and strategy for the Star Entertainment Group. Under that umbrella, I think he actually has the coolest job title, and he gets to help manage product and strategy for the Star Sydney, the Star Gold Coast, and Treasury Brisbane. If you've ever had a chance to be at any of those places, they're absolutely gorgeous. So I am completely envious of David and the role that he has. Prior to working for the Star Entertainment Group, he worked in Crown Melbourne, responsible for analytics and business strategy there. We're happy to have him on the call today. And also we have Benny Mancino. Benny Mancino is a good friend of mine. Met him about three years ago in a table games conference. We've been friends and ever since. We have a lot of respect for each other. Benny is currently the vice president of table games at Hard Rock Cincinnati, previously Jack Cincinnati, previously Horseshoe Cincinnati. It's changed a lot of names, but I think it's here to stay in the Hard Rock fashion. Has 25 years experience in gaming, worked in Vegas, worked all over with many different places. Prior to that was a owner, trainer, standardbreds, driver. He's done it all. He's been in gambling his entire life. Why did I choose Benny and David? Both of these guys, the reason why I admire them is both of them during their careers have been vulnerable in these types of settings, panels, webinars, being willing to ask the tough questions. And more importantly, they have prided themselves in educating their own staff and people around the globe in table games, whether it's optimization or strategy or rules. We couldn't be more luckier than have them. So welcome, gentlemen.
Nice to be here.
So, yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. So just as an agenda items, and then we'll kind of kick it off. So just what we want to review today, when we first started putting together some questions, I realized that, with two guys that have a lot of industry knowledge that's going to share some of that with you guys today, we thought we could only stay on three topics. Frankly, I think with David and Benny, we could spend hours, if not days, if not weeks, talking about table games and everything that comes to it. We'll focus on three. As a follow-up to webinar 2, we actually got a lot of really good feedback about some of the ideas that we had for North America, learning things in Asia, Australia, and whatnot. So we want to go kind of circle back to those recommendations and really let Benny and David give us some insights to that. We'll talk about yielding levers, really kind of what these two gentlemen deal with day in and day out, how they manage their business, how they adjust product, how they adjust game mix, and really get some insights to them. And then lastly, the tougher decisions on when time to maybe remove games, look at how they look at their own business. All we hear today is data. If you're watching the news, everybody's talking about data, which is a good thing, I guess. But we want to see from the experts in the industry how they assess their data, and hopefully they could bring us some insight. So I'll go through a couple of slides, and then I'll ask them a question. So again, to follow up really quickly with our webinar, for some of the folks I believe that are on our panel that joined us today, we're not in our second webinar. So I want to kind of briefly go through the three topics that we presented, and then I'll ask David and Benny a question along the line. So we talked about two main games and optimizing them, Baccarat and Roulette. Some of the solutions that we provided to the North America operators was potentially introducing commission-free Baccarat and also procedures to generate trends. that isn't typically done today in North America. And then from a roulette perspective, when you're thinking about yielding, just the U.S. does chip minimum. The majority, a table minimum, the majority of the world does chip minimum. I'll go through it in these slides. So the first one was commission versus commission free. Traditionally on the left side here, this is what most of North America has, commission baccarat. The industry outside of North America has transitioned mainly to commission free. The rule within baccarat that changes to make it commission free is when banker wins on 6, the payout is 1 to 2. I want to get our panelists' perspective on that. The second one is building trends, right? So we talked in detail in webinar 2 about what baccarat players tend to look at to decide on their wagers. They decide on what trends are, if they can predict what the next outcome will be, whether it be a banker, player, or tie. And then, so this is a couple of procedures that we presented to maybe enhance the experience for the guests to follow those trends. And then lastly, moving on to roulette, this is mainly the North America model where your table minimums are 5, 10, 15, all the way up to 100. But when folks are wanting to bet the inside numbers, it's typically for a $5, $10, and $15 game, it's dollar non-value chips. Quarter and $50 games is nickel non-value chips. All the folks that operate in North America know and understand this. But outside of the United States, it's very different. It's the table minimum is actually the non-value minimum. So they have dollar games, $2.50 games, $5 games, $10 games, and that's effectively how limits are managed outside of North America. So I'll start with Benny. So Benny, thank you for joining us for our second webinar. I know you were on it. You got to see some of these slides. I spoke to them obviously in much more detail. As U.S. operators, this might have been a new concept, probably not a new concept to you. So what I really would like to understand is, what are your thoughts on the 3 kind of procedures or processes that I presented, 2 for baccarat, 1 for roulette? Are you considering maybe changing something? Am I lucky enough to maybe change your mind and doing something differently? And if you think this is all kind of hogwash and whatnot, please, you're not going to hurt my feelings. Please let me know, or let the audience know, more importantly, what you agree or disagree when it comes to these.
Well, as you know, I'm pretty innovative and always up for something new, the next new thing. And I like to invent a lot of stuff myself. But as far as baccarat, we have very robust baccarat business in Cincinnati. And as far as what kind of games the different Asian players like, it's just kind of a trial and error. I'm really intrigued by and actually have started the process of just before this COVID-19 hit, of bringing in Super 6 baccarat, which would be the game you're talking about. In fact, I've since it is in the public domain, I kind of trademarked my own name for it, along with the Hard Rock mantra. And we're going to roll that out sometime after we get back in business. So, our commission-free game does very well. The regular commission-free baccarat, we don't have easy baccarat. We actually have the old version of the Shuffle Master commission-free, and the players like it. And I think they'll adapt pretty well, because they will think they're really getting an advantage if they're getting paid half instead of getting paid nothing. But there again, knowing the house advantage is around 1-4 and change for the Super 6, I'm going to gain a little bit of momentum in that regard. So I'm already on that. We've been trending for quite some time. I had a conversation with a couple people a few years ago, and they had talked to me, and then you also talked to me about the continuous games. And I started looking at my games and started looking at the dead games, and I realized that somebody needs to start off before anybody goes near it. So we started burning 3 to 4 hands right off the bat, and we've seen a marked increase of people who just automatically sat down. So we've been on the trending bandwagon for quite some time, and that's all. Time on device and time in motion, what it's all about. The sooner you get the person in the seat, the better. So in these times to come, our strategies for getting things done in the best possible and productive way is going to make a difference whether we survive or not. The final one, I'm very intrigued by, anything. I was a great roulette dealer, but the great roulette dealers have died. They're a thing of the past. I know in Europe they still got that mentality, and I'm not quite sure. I'm sure David's going to tell us how his roulette dealers are, but they just don't have the drive to learn the game and be a master of the craft. So a switch to a $2.50 chip would be quite a dramatic change to my crew. Although I really like it, because the less chips you have on the layout, right, the faster, the more decisions you're going to get. And that's what I'm all for. Luckily in Cincinnati, we have a monstrous roulette business. So only on the weekdays do I have a $15 game where it's $1 chip. And on the weekends, every game in the house but two are $25, $5 games. So we get some pretty good revolutions out of the wheels on the weekends. But I really like it. In fact, in this regard, somebody was talking to me about 000, which is something I will absolutely refuse to ever go to, as a 000 wheel. If I ever go back on that, I want you to, let's say, remember you said you'd never do that. But you got to.
Well, this is being recorded. Remember, this is being recorded, so it's documented.
Okay, so I want to retain this and memorialize this for later on. But 000, you're definitely going to drop the minimum down to get somebody involved. And I said, I really don't think you're going to do that well with this game, because at a $1 minimum, you're going to have so much play and so many chips stacked up, you're going to negate all the house advantage you're gaining by, the 7% 000 wheel. And I said, well, maybe we should think about going to a $2 chip. And they did go to a $2 chip, but it was kind of disastrous because of the same thing I'm talking about. Nobody has and they started, giving them double the amount of chips they should get. So I'm very intrigued by it. Not saying I would never try the 2.5, but right now it's not something that would fit for me.
No, understood. 2 out of 3 is pretty good. So David, you kind of do all this already. Couple questions. First one is, if you did change from maybe commission to commission free over the course of your career, what obstacles did you face when maybe you ripped that Band-Aid off and the majority of your mass floor became commission free, if there was? So that's question number 1. But really question number 2, again, envious of what you do. You get to travel the globe. You get to do a lot of market research over, North America, all over Asia, to really look at what the competitors are doing, to learn. And I know that you implement best practices at Star. So when you're thinking about Baccarat, since you kind of optimized as much as anyone else has, what's in your sights for Baccarat from an optimization perspective as you think about it?
Yeah, okay. I think just before we get into any of that, I just want to premise whatever we say today around, for anyone listening and watching, that you've got to take into consideration your own environment. Are you a locals, or are you a tourist destination? Are you a monopoly versus a competitor? What's your demand curve look like versus your supply of products? So some of what we talk about today will work really well for some operators, and for others it may not work because of the type of property they are. So everyone needs to consider that component first of all. You touched on data earlier as well, and I'll just mention that that's really, really important. So making sure that you get your data, get it flowing through, and have really good analytics teams that can understand it, read it, and apply whatever they see in the business really quickly. Especially as rules may change pretty quickly over the next few months, and 6 months or 12 months to each property. So to be able to do that is very, very important. Now onto the Baccarat question. Moving from commission to non-commission hasn't been overly difficult. It's pretty popular in Asia. As we've moved through, we've been cautious not to do it at the top end. So our top price points still run at commission. But certainly on our main gaming floor, all runs non-commission. We are in a monopoly market. So, if I play Baccarat and we set it at non-commission, then that's what you're going to play. Um,
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely.
yeah. Sorry.
Go ahead, Dave. No, go ahead.
So I can't remember any kickback in that space. Again, back to our data as we go into those higher price points, just seeing where our customers move to. So the customers will choose if they want to play commission and non-commission. Doing testing, if you've got enough tables, try it. See what happens, see what the customers like, see if your revenue increases on those tables, and then adjust. So continually test, learn from that, and then make adjustments.
That's great feedback.
Sorry?
No, great feedback.
That's right. As we're moving forward, there's probably a couple of things on the yield piece. One is, what we've found, certainly in Australia, is that customers like to cluster on baccarat tables. So when they see good runs, we talked about trends earlier and getting trends up there, and they follow the trends. And one of the dilemmas is, how do you spread the customers out? And for us, one of those keys has been to actually add more tables onto the floor, get more games live. That'll create more trends. There's a labour cost involved in that, but the revenue upside on the baccarat games is so strong that well and truly outperforms, I guess, the cost of the labour, and you end up in a profit positive scenario. So the more games going, the more trends, the more customers will spread out, and the more hands you can get into those customers during their visit. And that's the key, is to get more bets out for the customers. And probably the last thing I'll touch on briefly, as we see, where to next. What we're seeing is a lot in this side bet space. Macau, Singapore, and Australia really pushing the side bets hard. Traditionally, we've had pairs, tie in there as well, if you want to call that a side bet. But now we're seeing a lot of bets revolving around the six, the half on six. So customers almost wanting to hedge against that six coming up, and that's providing some really good gain on house edge for customers, for the casinos.
Right. That's good feedback. I mean, a couple of big topics you mentioned, right, is understanding your market. You think about North America, there's markets like Atlantic City and Las Vegas that couldn't be any more competitive. But, Benny might be somewhere in the middle where, he has competition, but it's not next door. It's maybe a 45-minute drive. So, understanding which levers you can pull and how sensitive your customers might be, understanding that is important. Unlocking trends, right? So that's always a conversation that you have to deal with the CFO, right? You want to add more labor to unlock revenue, and that's always a battle that operators have to face with. That's really good insight. One housekeeping thing for the audience, I forgot to mention, I apologize. If you do have any questions in the Zoom tab, there's something that says Q&A. Please type your questions along the way. At the end, after the third topic, I will then ask David and Benny. If you have a question for myself, that's great as well. I will then ask it. So if you have any questions along the way, please type it into the Q&A section. All right, I'll move on to the next topic. This is where it's the yielding lever versus house edge versus pricing. I get very excited about this because this has been a topic over the course of the last, say, 15 or 20 years, when 6 to 5 kind of got introduced, and then side bets became kind of a craze, and now progressives are a craze. So I really want to talk a little bit about a scenario in blackjack that maybe you're dealing with today, and then the options as operators like Benny and David have the control over, and how they're thinking about the yielding levers when we say hedge or pricing, but more importantly, coming out of COVID-19. So I'll go through the example very, very quickly. So again, what can an operator control? We all know this as operators. The way that I think about it from a yielding perspective, optimization is you can control your capacity, you control your open hours. What we're going to focus on here is the house edge or game mix and table pricing. And then the game pace is a product on how you pull those levers. We all know that when you are pulling these yielding levers at the right times, you are maximizing profit, and hopefully it's in alongside with the guest experience. You don't want to work against that. That's where it's a fatal error in the long run, and I think we'll talk about it on this subject. So here's kind of an entry-level blackjack game that many casinos in North America and Australia, wherever, there's that entry level game. It's that low limit game or lower limit. I won't say low. Not everyone is $15 to bet on a hand, but this is a $10 blackjack game. We'll call it BJ 101. Typically, when you have low table minimums with really good house edges. So this is an example of an 8-deck BJ game with 3-2 rules, stand 17, you're offering surrender, all those rules that come out to like a 0.43 or something that's the number 0.43. But with player error, you're playing at about a 1% house advantage with the mistakes that players may make. Typically, with a minimum like this, you want a busy table in order to show some type of profitability. So I'll go through the numbers really quickly. It's not important. It's just relative as we think about coming out of COVID-19. So here's a $10 game with 5 players. The theoretical revenue, when you multiply the decisions per hour over the house edge, over the, what is that, $75 in action per round, you're going to make about $50 an hour in revenue. That's what the math says. Again, assuming there's no side bets, there's no progressives, it's just playing the game of blackjack at a 1% edge. Maybe this jurisdiction has a 20% gaming tax. These players play on property about an hour when they're there. So the net contribution, which is kind of like profit, so it's your labor taken out, it's your gaming tax, it's your comp expense. You're going to make about $5 an hour. That's the math. And I always say, and one of the best things that happened to me as an operator when I started, when I was responsible for table games, is that ETGs also started. And, you hear all these house edges and you don't really know for sure. And, there's some out here that might be mathematicians, but as an operator, you just don't know. You kind of got to believe it, because the way that we look at data, drop, win, and hold, it doesn't get down to a house edge. Well, if you look at your ETG data, you'll see that your roulette games are holding 5.25%. Maybe where David is, it's 2.6 because it's a lot of single zero. But that's the math of the business. The player's profit per visit is going to be about $1. Now, this is with servicing 5 customers on average, right? So if you're an operator, you're probably trying to you're managing your schedules, you're managing your pricing. If you're going to have a $10 blackjack game, it's got to be close to full if you want to make any kind of profit. Well, COVID-19 happens, and let's assume what we're reading, what we've been studying, what many webinars have been talking about, or what are the social distancing requirements. Let's assume, for instance, 3 players at a table is max for the short term, whether it's 4, 6, 8 weeks, 12 weeks. Most likely you're going to have a limited amount of players at the table. Well, let's say you do nothing, right? Benny's at Hard Rock Cincinnati. I'm not saying he has this kind of game, but if he did, and he's like, okay, I'm not doing anything, which Benny obviously wouldn't, that game has now become unprofitable. That's the math. Now, yes, doesn't each individual come out to that? No, but when you take all the wagers in this situation over a long period of time, this situation would become an unprofitable situation with the labor, with the comps, with the whatnot, with only 3 players at the table. So if we're going from $75 in action to $45 in action, the math says that you will be unprofitable. Well, that's when the yielding levers come into play. So if you were going to turn a switch on and you had option A and you were running a marginal business where you were making a profit in your lower limit games, we don't make any changes to our strategy, those games will become unprofitable. So what can folks like Benny, David, and the audience do? So let's go to an alternative view. And I'm not suggesting that as an operator you do this. David nailed it on the head. You have to understand what market you're in, if you can make changes or not from a yielding, whether it be house edge or pricing. So option 2. All right, I'm going to offer $10 blackjack games again when we reopen out of COVID-19, but I don't want it to be unprofitable. Benny likes his job. He likes being in Ohio. He probably doesn't want to lose his job by running unprofitable games. So he's like, I'm going to add 6 to 5. Okay, well, again, just the math of the business, assuming that the players have the same time on device, they average about 45 minutes on device. The game goes from unprofitable to making $46 an hour in profit. That's what the math says. There's assumptions here that the players will play exactly 45 minutes. They may play less, they may play more, we're not sure. That could be an option. Another option is, nope, I'm a purist. I do not believe in changing the house edge on forced things. I'm going to just raise my game. So I'm not going to have any more $10 games when we reopen. I may make them $15 games, and where the average bet goes to around $20. Well, then now it becomes a profitable game again, right? So when we're thinking about the math of the business and whether you're yielding in price or you're using your yielding lever in house edge, that's possible. But say Benny is like, my market's too strong. I can't have all $15 games. I really don't want to do 6 to 5. But if I'm going to do 6 to 5, I'm going to make it a $5 game. I'm going to make a real entry level game. Well, the funny thing is that a $5 6 to 5 game is more profitable than a $10 3 to 2 game with different rules. Again, that's just the math of the business. And again, is an individual customer going to win or lose differently based on that? Absolutely. When we think of all wagers over the long run, this is what the game will make over time. So I guess when we think about it at Tangam, we think about blackjack yielding, we think about house edge, and then we think about pricing. And from a house edge perspective, we then break it down to what's forced on the customer and then what's optional on the customer. So what's forced? Things like, let's assume this is an 8-deck game, stand 17. You're going to offer surrender. You're going to allow double down after a split. You can split cards up to 4 times. That standard BJ game that we all experienced for many years. But you want to increase that house edge because you can only service three customers now, and you want to make sure the games are profitable. Here's just some examples, right? Okay, I'm going to make the game 6 to 5. Well, what does that do to the house edge? It adds 1.39. Again, we know all of this. It's all on Wizard of Oz. If you don't agree with this, this is where I got the information. You want to go from your stand game to your hit soft 17 game, you're going to add 0.22%. If you, in a high limit thing, we all know if you the less decks, the slightly better edge it is for the player. Push 22, why is all on its own, it's almost a 7% edge. But again, these are forced things. So the customer, when they're playing, they don't have any options. If you change the rules on them, this is the edge they're going to play to. The other alternative is giving the customer an option to decide and still increasing your house edge because some of your players will participate. And that's where you think about, well, insurance I use as an example, but all BJ games have an insurance, but that's a 7.5% house edge. Surrender actually gives something back to the player if you're allowing late surrender after a 10. But then you have the world of side bets and progressives, right? These are optional wagers. And I have a lot of great conversations with a lot of friends that are on this webinar today about side bets. It's eroding blackjack. I really hope that David and Benny touch on that. But, they are optional. And side bets can range anywhere from a 3% edge to a 21% edge. Progressives are all around the 20% edge factor. So that's if you wanted to manipulate the house edge, right, from its core game. If you don't want to do that, then we think about what pricing strategies you could do. So when I think about pricing, I think about, well, what limits are allowable in a certain pits? 10, 15, 25. So maybe when you're going forward at a COVID-19, you're not going to allow a $10 tier potentially. One new trend that's kind of been talked about with some friends of mine in the United States is because there's been such a participation in side wagers, and I really like David and Benny to get your take on this, is that instead of yielding by just the core blackjack wager, I'm going to let people bet any way to a wager. If I have a $25 blackjack game and they want to bet $5 on blackjack and $20 in side bets, let them have it, right? That's a new starting trend. Seen some property I visited that started it. And then another option from a pricing perspective is if you're going to be aggressive and you're pricing up, well, do you want to allow grandfathering in now to not maybe your loyal customers that are coming in? You do need to price up because you have limited spots to service, but maybe for the couple of players that are there, you're like, hey, you can play for as long as you want. So again, that's the way that we at Tangam kind of think about managing your yielding levers, whether it be pricing or house edge. So I'll turn it over to David. Obviously, and you mentioned that the labor is quite high in Australia. It's probably something that when you're thinking about these yielding levers, you're probably thinking about that every day. I think you guys have Blackjack Plus, Blackjack Plus Plus, Blackjack Plus 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 Plus, all these kind of things. And you're in charge of product, right? I mean, you have the hardest job in the world and the best job in the world, but you tinker around with this stuff on a regular basis. So, give us some insight to coming out of COVID-19. Are these things that you might adjust? What are some of the pitfalls that you might think about? All those kind of things.
Yeah, thanks, Ari. Look, you've hit on everything pretty much. And it certainly as we're coming out and looking to reopen at some stage, and you're talking about having 3 customers on a table. What does that do to the games? The cheaper games is something that we're absolutely considering. The one thing, I guess, the bit of information that was missing from your table before there is really about demand. From there, I don't know what the demand is. So again, each property is going to have to work through what their demand's going to look like. So, if you put the price up too much and the demand is not there for a $20 game, you're going to have empty tables. And if you don't have a stream of customers coming through and you put the edge too high, you're going to rip through your customers too quickly. So you've got to really understand what your demand is. And I'll get back to that piece I said earlier around testing, understanding what the market can bear and being nimble and being ready to adjust. But I would certainly look as a priority, I suppose, to say, how can we get the customers to choose how they want to play and how they want to increase their value to the casino. So give them the side bets, market the side bets, get them onto those products first rather than forcing things down their throat. If you do have enough tables, put variety out there for the customers. So give them the option of having the lower priced, higher edge game and then the higher priced, lower edge game. So then they can go and choose what they want to play. For some venues, if you don't have the volume of tables available, that will be difficult. But for the bigger venues, you should be able to do that. But as I said, give the customers the choice. I think the other thing we really need to touch on is around that service proposition as well. So with 3 customers on a table, the service piece there, I think we talked there about you had them on a 60-minute play time, going down to a 45-minute play time. There, perhaps if we're improving that service component for a customer, the engagement with the dealer and the environment, then we can keep that time to 60 minutes and increase our hold. So what we're trying to do is, the customers are bringing in $200. How much are they leaving within their pocket when they leave? So every hand we can get into the customers at either that higher price point or that higher edge is valuable. I think that's probably it.
That's good feedback. So Benny, the inventor of Jack, you've played around and tinkered around with force versus optional. What's awesome about you is that you're willing to put all this on LinkedIn for the world to see, the things that you try and don't try, things that have worked and don't work. So kind of the example that I showed, how are you thinking about coming out of COVID-19? Are you going to make any tweaks to the games that you currently have? Keep things the status quo and see how they are? Love to get your perspective on how you think about maybe pulling these levers if you need to.
Well, it sounds like David's the down under version of myself. It's unbelievable how the mindset. So anyway, if I had to give anybody advice coming out into the COVID-19, you got a blank canvas right now. This is the time you need to, and if you don't know house advantages, this is the time you better learn, because it's going to be such a tight market. When you think about it, 3 players, I got a 33% tax on revenue. I've got to make everything, whether it's yielding or whether it's a tweak to the game, I got to make it count just to try to get to even. That's my goal right off the bat, is to just try to get to even. And how can I do that? Well, maybe I would go in and look at, if I was going into a new place, I'd look at all the pay tables on all the carnival games. Maybe they don't have to be as liberal as they are. We had one in Cincinnati, the Crazy 4, that was very, very liberal. I ticked it up, nothing changed. It's the same players played, but yet the game made an extra $500,000 a year. These are the things you got to look at, and you got to look at them now. And David's right. Every jurisdiction's different. I've been lucky enough to work in Las Vegas at a major property. I've worked downtown Las Vegas, and then as the vice president, corporate vice president for Jack, I took care of the Cleveland market, the Detroit market, and the Cincinnati market, which was, all 3 were totally different. And you got to figure out how much you can twist the button or squeeze, without going too far. And David's right. You just take a little sample, you take a little test, you put something out there, you give it a try. One thing we tried in Cincinnati was mandatory side bets. And it worked out really well. You know, we had players that said, you know, kept getting surveys. We want a $5 game. We want a $5 game. Well, I can't put a $5 game in a 6 to 5. I can't make it profitable. So how do I make it profitable? You know, and we determined that, you know, let's see if we can write a mandatory side bet into the ICs, and the regulators accept it. They did, and the game's, you know, at $220 an hour per, you know, game. So it's really a good game for us, and outperforms a 3-2. Like it's not even in the same league. I wish I could put 100 of them in there, but then there's your tolerance factor. You always got to think of the how much of this can I shove down the player's throat? How much 6 to 5? You know, in Las Vegas over the last, you know, decade, they've been able to shove almost 80% 6 to 5 through their guests, which I think is going to change here real shortly, because they're not going to have that convention business that just drops their money on anything that you know, has a card on it. But me, you know, like in Cincinnati, we can tolerate maybe about 20% of the games with low limit 6 to 5s, and they eat it up. But then, you know, like David said, as I go up, I lower the house advantage, and the limit goes up with it. And that's just how you yield it. You brought up Jack, so I might as well talk about it. So I really hate 6 to 5. And ultimately, when we change to Hard Rock, somewhere down the line, we'll eliminate 6 to 5. Because I come up with a game, it's called Jack. And all Jack is I've taken you got two colors of cards on a blackjack game. You got red cards, you got black cards. Well, I thought to myself, well, what's the worst promotion you can do at a casino in blackjack? Well, you pay 2 to 1 on blackjack. Okay. What's the worst payoff? What's the worst payoff the player can receive? Even money on Super Fun 21, right? So how do I take both of them and put them together? So I said, okay, black going to win half of the time, and this is going to be a quarter of the time. And you know, how's that work? So anyway, of course we know quarter of the time it's black, quarter of the time it's red, and 50% of the time it's red and black. So I pay 2 to 1 on a blackjack. I pay 3 to 2 on a red blackjack, and I pay even money on a red and black blackjack. And the players look at the line and they think, oh my God, I'm getting this great deal. I got 2 great payoffs and only 1 bad one. Well, it ends up being about 0.57 over any rules, whatever rules you put on it. So it sits there at 1.375, which is just below a regular blackjack, but just a little better than a 6 to 5. And the people play it like it's just a regular blackjack game, and it's really, you know, talking about making a lever, it can make a difference. That was it. Just a little tweak, a little rule. And right now is the time to look at all your rules on all your games and see, hey, maybe I can not hit soft 17 or hit soft 17 and the high limit. You know, I've heard of some of these California casinos going to hit soft 17 and the high limit. Maybe this is the time to do it. Time to do it right now. Take the Band-Aid off right this second and go for it.
Good feedback. You know, I love that you innovate, and I know we're all appreciative to see it, and that you're usually so open to share it with us. So that's great. All right, so we'll go to the last subject, which probably I'm most excited about, because this is, you know, reading the news, watching the news every day. Everybody's looking at different models, coming up with different predictions. Well, I think that's what all of us operators do. We all look at data quite differently. We see things very differently, and we come up with assumptions based on what we see. And we could both be looking at the same data set, but it's just the way that we interpret it and come up with a solution. So what we really want to talk about, you know, optimal game mix by looking through data to make those adjustments, and really want to hear both of your feedback. So go through some of the data points that operators have been looking at for quite some time. From a financial perspective, we all know since the 50s in Vegas, drop, win, and hold, right? It's an easy, absolute number that we've all been able to understand. Cash goes in the drop box. A lot of activity happens at a table. At the end of the day, you get into graveyard, you do your roll, and you know how much the game won, and then you derive your hold from that, right? So as U.S. operators, I could speak because I only worked in the U.S., but it really operators across the globe, that hold number is this big, important number that we all live and die by. Well, gaming table management systems evolved 20 years ago. They started, and with table management systems, we've had an opportunity and been fortunate enough as an industry to look at more data, to look more specifically at operational data, knowing when your games are open, When you understand when your games are open, you could derive win per open hour. You could look at your pricing strategy. You could understand your occupancy. You could understand your average player wager. You can figure out the percentage of the time your games are sitting empty, all from using that table management system and different points of data that you're collecting. When you marry the two, you'll get something that looks like this. You'll be able to look at your win per unit per day, when they're open, the win per open hour, your pricing strategy, all the things that I just mentioned. And this is all well and good, right? And all of us, when I was an apper, you get drowned in reports, and they look like something like this, and they're like, all right, Benny, make a decision. I don't know. This becomes based on interpretation. And I think where the real, when I think about the strategist, the product strategist, David, that's part of his title. It's like, well, how do you take this and bring it to your floor, right? And we all pride ourselves. And I was that operator. I was so proud of the floor that we created at Parks, the last place that I worked at, and where the games were located. And, the underperforming games go here and the overperforming games go over there. And this is where players flow. We all take a lot of pride in our layout, and we're making adjustments to our layout. David, you're responsible for ETGs and slots. You're always thinking about maximizing, revenue or profit per square foot, or however you look at the metrics. So I guess I'll start with you, Benny. There's a lot of data out there, and we could all look at it different ways. I guess my question to you is, when you're thinking about your layout and where games are located, how do you decide what KPIs are important to you? And the second question, again, because you publicly mentioned it, you put Let It Ride in the graveyard about 6 months ago, right? You told the world that Let It Ride was dead, and that's been a trend in our industry. I actually have my opinion on why that game might be dying, and if we have time, I could share it. We might not. But what I'd like to understand is what's Benny's lens? How do you look at this stuff? And when did you make the decision that Let It Ride just had to go?
Well, I definitely do a comparison on the volumes on the games and win per open hour on constantly. Every month I run the report on the win per open hour per game, and if there isn't something that's necessarily affecting it, I'll look for trends and percentage of drops in win per open hour. And if there isn't a reason for it, then I start looking at the popularity of the game. And one of them that really stuck out to me that was just I just wasn't making the money I was with the games beside it was Let It Ride. It was almost 50% difference. And I mean, you look at the Let It Ride. I mean, it's a game basically the player doesn't bet more than one unit unless they've got a good hand, right? They get to pull the other two back, so that they can sit there and they can grind out on that game forever. So it had been a Cincinnati staple at $5 for the first 3 or 4 years, and it never went up beyond $5. So, one of my ship managers was very passionate about, the damage it was going to be done if we pulled Let It Ride out. So I said, okay, well, we got to do something. We're going to jack the minimum up to 10 and 15, no matter what. Minimum that's ever going to be is 10. So we moved it up, and we gained a little bit. We gained a little bit with that lever move upwards and yielding, but it still performed at only about 55% of the other carnival games, like Ultimate Texas Hold'em. And so, I decided that it was time to put it in its place. And, one thing about Let It Ride is really kind of, and carnival games as a whole, is the people who play the carnival games tend to bring a lot of people who play slots. So you just got to kind of, so I checked my top 10 Let It Ride players and who their spouses was. And I went that far in a dive to figure it out. But we figured out we're probably pretty safe. There was nobody there that we were going to take down. And we made the decision to pull the plug on Let It Ride. And it's been a good decision.
Yeah, just as a follow-up to a question to that is that when you're laying out your floor, so you have your top earners, you mentioned, I know that win per open hour is a big one for you. So do you have a sense of if the game's like when you're laying out a floor, what's your kind of thought process on, at an entrance? Is it games that perform really well? Is it the games that don't perform very well? What's your kind of methodology when you're thinking about, laying out that floor?
Well, the entrance is pretty easy. I'm going to put my worst possible game there, 6-5s, because people have a tendency just to come in and flop down on the first game they see. So that's pretty easy. This situation we got right now, where my floor is probably going to be 50% of what it was for a while at least.
Yep.
Now I've got to figure out how to plant that checkerboard to do everything I want. And, you know, I've got my ideas of, you know, how much I can tweak and you know, get as much bang for the buck. But it's, you know, like Dave said, it's just going to be for this, in this situation, it's going to be an experiment. You know, I always pride myself that I can take data and competitive set information and make any operation productive. But in this situation, I don't have no data to go by. So I'm gonna be winging it. And one thing I'd say, can't be afraid to, you know, if something ain't working, to change it the next day now, because we're gonna have to act fast to keep up with the customers, because it's gonna change daily, monthly, you know, yearly now, until we get back to whatever the new normal is.
Do you believe your gaming board will be more nimble than they probably were before? I know some jurisdictions you need 30, 60, 90-day notices to make a change. Do you think that the gaming boards will be a little bit more flexible when you realize, okay, I had 2 UTH games side by side, but now they told me it has to be every other table. Well, I can't open up both UTH games, and those are my highest poker derivatives. Do you think they're going to, because places like Las Vegas, you don't have to ask no one anything. Where I came from, it was a 30-day, you know, new plans have to be drawn up, they have to be submitted to the state. You hope that you get it in 30 days. So do you think that the gaming boards will be a little bit more lenient?
Well, when I started in Ohio, it was quite I would never recommend somebody coming straight from Las Vegas and jumping into a regional market, because they could be in for quite a shock. Really, and they could get themselves in a whole lot of mess trying to say that, oh, that's crazy. Well, you know, Ohio was very strict and very tough when I came into it. And over the time, we've, you know, they know that now we're more of a seasoned operation. We're very transparent. If we make a mistake, we say, hey, you know, this is what we did, you know, and they know they can trust us to be very transparent with them. So that trust has went a long way for us. And our gaming board is more like a partner now than you know, they're still a regulator, but they're a partner in everything we do. And they've already been up front and said, hey, listen, things are going to happen a little quicker right now because they have to. You let us know what you need, and we'll consider it. So I was really, I know everybody isn't that fortunate, but right now I think I'm in a good place in Ohio.
That's great to hear. So David, moving on to you. This is your lifeblood, right? Looking at data to try to make product and strategy decisions amongst the 3 properties combined. I think you have well over 500 tables between Sydney, Gold Coast, and Brisbane. What's your magic, man? It gives you a chance to kind of tell the world, how do you look at data? You know, when you were at Crown, now that you're at Star Entertainment, how do you look at the business?
I think firstly it's important to play to your strengths. So strengthen your strengths. So the things that are working well, get more of, and not spend time trying to fix things that are essentially broken. Sure. Get rid of them. However, you've got to be also checking to see if some games are complementary products. I think Benny sort of touched on it there. Pai Gow to Baccarat. Are customers playing one game as a break from playing a game where they spend most of their money? So, you know, I think we look at it on slots as well. If we've got some games that are unique to customers, and we still make a decent amount, but just they're not very busy. So we've got to look at that sort of stuff. Unique revenue, and that will depend on your floor space. So if you've got plenty of floor space and you've got dealers and you've got the capacity, then you can carry things that are less profitable. I think poker is always sort of one of those ones that's in that bucket. People look at poker and say, well, it doesn't make as much money as Baccarat or Blackjack or Roulette. However, that's money that you're not going to get elsewhere. Those customers aren't going to generally flip over another product. So as long as it's still profitable and you've got the space to put it, then you know you keep running it. But again, it does come down to what's my best use of the floor space. And for the casinos that have got table slots and ETGs, you really need to look at all three products together rather than separating them out and saying this is a tables area, this is a slots area, and fighting over floor space. It's trying to get that right.
Yeah, and you know it's great. I know the eye opener for me, David, branching out, leaving the U.S. as I took this role at Tangent 4 years ago. I was an operator, kind of with blinders on. I started in poker, then went to table games, and you know in the U.S. we're not always structured in the way that you are, where you can have that 20,000-foot view, right? So Benny's probably, sometimes we're put in situations as operators where Benny's responsible for tables and tables only. So, it's hard for operators sometimes to think about holistically what is the best footprint. So I think as you transitioned into the role now, was that role always there, or is this something new where you're responsible for all of casino strategy and it makes things a bit easier?
When I came to the Star for Sydney, it was into all three, and that's quite easy.
Okay.
Especially gone now the other way and separated them out. And it's as we've gone to group think, to be able to look at all product groups across three properties is too much. So we need that expertise into tables and in expertise into slots to do that. But it's important that the people that are looking after that work really well together, so that they can take a view that what's best for the business. So sometimes the space is going to be great for tables, sometimes it's going to be great for slots or ETGs.
All right, cool. We got about 7 minutes left, and it looks like there's a bunch of questions here. So I'll sort through them and ask away to who it makes sense. So one question from the great country of Canada asked if the panelists have thought about progressive side bets. If they have tried it, how was it received? Either Benny or David, if you have any experience with progressives on, progressive side, any progressives on baccarat, and if either one you have any knowledge with it, how has it worked? Does it not work? Either one you have an opinion?
Well, I'm aware of a progressive in Melbourne on baccarat on the side bets there. I couldn't comment on how well it's worked. So it does look at the tie bet there, and one of the difficulties in baccarat is when it pays out, how do you pay out all the customers that have bet on that? So whereas a poker hand, it's individuals when you hit that, and blackjack's the same, but when you hit baccarat, it's group win when all wins. So I am aware they do have one, but I couldn't comment on how well it's working.
Right. Benny, you know anything about progressives? I know they're in a few properties in the U.S.
No, I haven't seen anything that really knocked my socks off. At the last G2E, side games had some kind of combination slot and baccarat progressive with it's one of their more popular games, but they've incorporated into it like a baccarat side bet. But the person actually plays on the side bet or the progressive on a keyboard, and it looked pretty interesting. But we'll have to see how that plays out. Just as we're on the topic of progressives, last year I moved to $5 progressives from $1 progressives, and now you're in a market, a situation where we're going to have 3 players on a game on some of these carnival games. This might be the chance that you got to take that shot and move that progressive up to $5, because even if you only got one player playing the $5, it's probably what you would have had with a full table before. So this may be the time. I know a lot of people were really hesitant to make that move, but we didn't miss a beat. We dropped maybe 5 percentage points for a week or two, and then boom, the occupancy and the utilization side, but I mean the progressive was right back to where it was at $1.
So it looks like there's a lot of questions coming in. So if you plan on watching Bill Gates on CNN, you're going to have to wait, because we're going to have to go past 9 o'clock. Another question, and this was specifically for Benny. He said, what's your angst when it comes to 000? Is it because the PC is too high I guess this person's been in the business a while. I haven't heard PC in a while, which is great to hear. Brings back some good memories. So is it because the PC is too high? And how high of a PC are you willing to offer?
Well, it is kind of because the PC is too high, and I just think two things I don't think a real roulette player, which I don't know if there's such thing as a real roulette player, but there's people who think they have a little edge on roulette and they play some pretty good money on it. I don't think they're going to go to it. So you're going to drop the minimum down, and you're going to have all this ganged up action on this 000. And I really think it'll slow the game down. It'll negate that extra 2% you get. I don't know. It's just something. That was my main game when I dealt, and I'm just kind of partial to it. And I just think it's I don't know. It's dirty or something. I don't know. I haven't got nothing to back it up, and I haven't seen enough data. But I haven't heard of no casino managers like at the Venetian or some of these properties that have the 000 dancing in the streets over. And I walked through a couple times while I was at G2E, and the 000 was closed. So that tells me that the demand isn't there.
Yeah, as a follow-up, I mean, the one question when people ask my opinion, I was like, if you have a lot of angst, but it's something that you want to try or being pressured, I'm like, maybe try it on your ETG first. Right, that's your kind of lowest threshold. Try 000 there. That's typically your lowest average bet customer, and if it works there, then maybe you could consider it, and you could quickly deviate if you had to. I guess
a lot cheaper than buying a wheel too.
Yeah, for sure. This one's around data, so it's actually a really good question. I think we'll let David take this one. It says all the data that is received is dependent on the accurate supervisor input. Are we at the point where RFID chips allowing the system to give average bets and time on the game is the best way to go, or is it still too fast? I think what the question is that maybe a reluctancy to use data to make decisions, but are we at a point now where it's where we should go with RFID, or is it actually still too expensive and not worth it? I'm sure, David, you looked at this for your 3 properties and whatnot. So what are your thoughts on RFID, bet recognition, and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think we've always considered the data to be consistently inaccurate. So it's good for getting trends. It probably doesn't hurt every now and then to spend a little bit of labour and do some sampling to see how far out your data actually is. So then, that'll give you a bit of a baseline, whether it's once every 6 months or once every year. With regard to RFID chips, it's getting very, very close. You see MGM in Macau is running with the Baccarat smart tables, Sands in Macau been trialling it. So, it's not very far away. It's as the cost continues to come down on that sort of technology, you suddenly get into the land of getting accurate turnover, accurate percentages on your edges to what people are actually playing to. I think you had 1% up there for blackjack, or we think people play to 3 to 4% based on their activity on ETGs. So then it'll make things much easier to make decisions, or maybe it'll make it hard with a lot more data. But it's certainly heading that way and not far away. And it really depends on how much people want to spend, and doing that cost benefit analysis of setting up your casino with full RFID kit. It's not cheap. It's a fair exercise. So you've got to figure out what the benefits are going to be.
Sure. Benny, you ever looked in that? Any comment on RFID? Not ready for it? Too expensive in Ohio?
Yeah, it'd be, unless I've got a true RFID system, it's going to tell me what the player's average bet is every time without a miss. That technology is getting really, really close with a combination of cameras and RFID. But if that would happen, that'd be the holy grail. If it was affordable, it'd be the way to go. But I don't think it's ready for prime time in a mass scale in the U.S. yet.
Yeah. A couple of the same questions. I'm sure you guys have seen all the pictures with these plexiglass dividers. There's a few comments here on what both of your thoughts are. I guess David, sure you've seen them. What are your thoughts? Are they installing right now as we speak, or you're holding on?
Look, I think different jurisdictions are going to be different. When you look at Australia, we're down to, I think, as a whole country, 7 or 8 new cases a day, 900 active cases. Our casinos aren't open at the moment. I think Darwin will be the first to go open probably in early June, I would think. By that stage, if the trend continues and nothing changes, you'd think that there would be only a nominal amount of cases in Australia, and most of those will have been hospitals or nursing homes. So I don't see at the moment a demand for those big, I'll call them hideous screens in front of dealers.
Right. Benny, I already know your answer, but why don't you tell the audience?
And I got to quantify this, that I work for a huge organization. If they decide to go with them, then we will be going with them. That's just the way it is. But my true opinion is they're an absolute waste of time because of a couple bullet points. One is that, who's going to stand there and clean them every time the guest gets up, because they're going to need to be cleaned. I mean, they've proven that, this virus will sit on a piece of plastic for 48 hours. Another thing is, if you ever see any of these dramatizations of somebody sneezing, if a guy coughs or sneezes, it goes up in the air and goes a mile, three-quarters of a mile the other way. So the shield's going to do nothing unless the guy's wearing a mask, right? And then they got some of these standalone ones I've seen, and I just looked at them in horror today. They kind of come up and they're like a stanchion. They just sit beside the player and have a thing. That's a lawsuit just waiting to happen when somebody gets tangled up into one of them. So I really don't see it. I mean, in my opinion, in table games, social distancing is something that's a real challenge, I would say. I don't want to use the words impossible, but it is a challenge. So I say, social protection is our only means. The player has to be wearing a mask. The dealer has to be wearing a mask. There has to be plenty of sanitizer, and if the person don't wash their hands, we can't protect them anyway. But that's one man's opinion.
Yeah. Here's a good question. Here's a good question for I guess for both of you, but we'll start with David. We covered it in the first webinar, but not really. So it says estimating demand for reopening, right? David, you have over 300 tables at the Star Sydney. You're gonna have some social distancing measures. Very busy property before this. It's asking what approaches would you take or recommend when it comes to forecasting demand as you're trying to anticipate that? Like what approaches are you going to take to try to figure out what you actually need?
We start with your demand when you're shut down and see where you finished off at. I guess it's a little bit of the mood of the community as well. Some jurisdictions, when they open, the mood will be still very, very cautious, where others might be very, very optimistic, and people are itching to get out there and still feel relatively safe. So you might see demand, in line with where you shut down, or it might be slightly up on that. I don't think day one's going to knock our queues out the door and back to 100%. But we touched on it. It's really that piece about being nimble. And being able to move quickly on your feet when you're seeing demand increase rapidly, and be able to change to those requirements. Whilst again, we don't know yet what the governments will allow. We look at our properties, and some of our volume is driven by theatres, restaurants, bars, nightclubs. So if they're not open, we're not going to see that volume sort of coming in as well. So we've got to be realistic about these things.
Yeah, for sure. And for you, Benny, you probably have about 100 games. You're probably going to be only able to open 50 of them if what we're seeing stays consistent. How are you going to anticipate, do you need all those 50 games open all the time? Where's your starting point?
Well, I think it's going to matter for each individual operator, whether they're in a hot spot, they're not in a hot spot, what's their age demographic of their customer. To begin with, I know I'm not going to fill the carnival games like I did at 10 o'clock every morning for a while. I just know it. going through 911 in Las Vegas and going through the mortgage crisis, I kind of got to look at how that people get their mind works and the impact to begin with. It's a significant hit. I think here in the Cincinnati market, I'm probably going to start off around 40%, maybe a little bit better than that on the weekend. I just know my guests that well, and I think every operator knows their guests. But I think if you're in a hot spot, your numbers going to be a little bigger, and if your demographic's a little older, it may be a little slower to come back. But yeah, it's just like we talked about, you know, the games and the type of games you have. Every jurisdiction is going to be a little bit different.
Yeah. A couple more questions, and I think we'll end it. I know we're about 10 minutes over already. One's good. I think it pertains to both of you, but maybe Benny, for one of the comments you had about yielding levers and edge levers, I'll kind of summarize the question. It's saying, thoughts on burning out players too quickly due to high house edge games in order to offer that lower price. So you mentioned that $5 6-5 game, but forcing the side wager. The second part of the question was, if casual players, which is I guess who you're trying to attract, if casual players don't get value for their money, they don't tend to become long-term customers in this person's view, the person that's asking it. So is that a concern of yours? That, yeah, you're able to offer the lower game, but chances are there's probably no shot of them winning in a session if they flat bet the $5. Is that a concern of yours, or you're just saying, hey, you wanted a $5 game, here it is. There's not much else I can do for you.
Well, I mean, I can only go by, I started off, and like Dave said, you start off slow. I started off with one of them. There's 7 of them on the floor now. I go by demand, and if the demand's there, if not, you'll see if it's a game's burning somebody out. There's a lot of games that will burn people out really quick. I mean, you ever watch a DJ Wow game? They're almost dead all the time, but they're one of the biggest per hour games I have on the floor. And I couldn't have 5 DJ Wow. So you gotta test the water and slowly edge up. And let me tell you, the social gambler does not care. They'll bet on 2 donkeys, flicking their tails. I mean, they'll just do that. And if they're really going to end up being your long-term, high volume, high worth customer, they usually gravitate. And if they start off and they're playing the bad games, and all of a sudden you start seeing them play baccarat, and they know that we got less of a margin on them. They start to learn and they develop. So you just, like I say, you just take it a little step at a time. You got to offer them games. That's where the money is.
Cool. I guess one last question. There's a few more I won't be able to get to, but the other thing, I think it's a valid, and I think they want to hear from you guys, and there's still about 100 people on here. They're asking, because you'll only be able to basically offer half of the product, do you think some of these vendors that provide carnival games and progressives, what do you think the billing is going to be like? It's really not for me to discuss, but it is a valid question, I guess, for you guys. If you can't open up half of your games or whatever the case may be, they're asking what do you think will happen with the lease games, I guess, that you're paying for, shufflers that you're paying for?
I think that's just a negotiation piece between each of the properties and their suppliers to have that discussion. Your contract, how your contract's worded, and have that conversation with the supplier. I think they like to say we're all in this together. Everyone's trying to battle through until the other end of the scale. So just have that conversation.
Sure. Most of the vendors have been really good through all this and immediately sent us an email saying, they were going to stop any kind of fees during the downtime and adjust for any half month or whatever we'd have. But you're absolutely right. But here's the thing is that, and a lot of operators are especially new, they've jumped up the ladder pretty quickly. You know what? You can negotiate. You can say, hey, I need you to cut me a little slack, and they will. I'm probably one of the most hated guys when it comes to vendors, because I push them for every dime I can get out of them. But you know what? In the long run, I'm pretty loyal to the ones who are willing to work through it and give us a shot.
Well, listen, guys, great remarks. I loved everything that you guys answered. I got to soak it in. I learned something new every day. To speak on behalf of all the other operators in the room, I'm sure they were. I really appreciate your time. For all the folks from all over the globe that joined us today, we'll probably have another webinar at some point. We're really enjoying this. We love the feedback. For those that I didn't get to answer some of your questions, I'm sorry, we just kind of ran out of time. This recording will be available. We will be sending a survey. And if you do have any follow-up questions, that's the email to reach out. If you want to, like I said, I believe we'll have the recording available to you guys in the next couple of days. I think we'll be asking that question in the survey. Thanks again for joining us. Be well, be health, be safety, and hopefully all of your operations open up very soon. Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
So good night.